Hey, we are.
Hello.
Good morning, everyone. And welcome to our latest in a series of LinkedIn Lives that we've been doing. This is the hopefully eagerly anticipated launch of this year's version of the salary guide. If you don't know what Harnham's salary guide is, then we're going to cover that in a bit more detail very shortly. Basically what we're going to be doing in this particular session is we're going to be going through some of the key insights and findings that we've seen from the data and analytics market this year, and discussing some of the trends and topics that have come out from this edition of the salary guide, as well as hopefully answering the questions that come through. So everyone who's watching, please feel free to put any questions and comments below. There should be a place for you to do that. I don't know if it's going to be right now or immediately afterwards, but you should be able to download this year's salary guide using a link as well very shortly. So get your hands on that, and we'll be keen to get your thoughts and feedback as well. So just to go through and introduce everyone first and foremost, in no order of preference, we've got Talitha.
Hi everyone, I'm Talitha. My background is I have about 7 years experience working across customer insight and marketing analytics, and I now manage that team as well as our digital analytics function for the UK on the perm side.
And we've got Ross as well.
Yeah, I've been here a similar amount of time to Talitha, actually, working mainly in the BI and data engineering markets myself, and I now manage our data science business area on top of our data and tech team.
And last but not least, so I manage our contract practice for UK and Europe. We're only going to be discussing insights from the UK today. Similar story. Joined at the same time as Talitha and Ross. So Tali, are you able to tell us a little bit more about the guide and what it is?
Yeah. So this is actually the 9th year of us doing our salary guide. So for those of you who are maybe new to Harnham or haven't come across it before, hopefully you have. But the guide is a comprehensive overview of salaries and also trends across all the different disciplines that we recruit for, covering both perm and contract in the UK. So this year we've had over 3,000 respondents to the salary survey. So we collate this data, and we also collate data from our placements that we've made, as well as other information that we collect from candidates throughout the year. We collate all this data, and we've had an independent analyst, Nikki Hart, who's completed all the analysis. So she's used SAS and Excel to do all the analysis on the data, and all the results are collected and based around the median to ensure that any outliers don't really have that much of an impact on the findings. There's a section in the guide which then talks about this in a little bit more detail and gives a bit more overview into the analysis that she's done. So you can have a good read of that when it's released.
And just to kick off with the kind of topics that we're going to cover, the first thing we're going to tackle is the elephant in the room, which is COVID, obviously, and everyone's been talking about it at the moment. Just a note on the data. So we actually started collecting data for this around mid-January and finished in April. So the data has been affected by COVID, but actually what that's allowed to do is kind of compare the results like before COVID was impacting the market and afterwards as well. And it's kind of quite useful for everyone to talk about how COVID is affecting the analytics market. So before we go into some of the data, Dan or Tali, do you want to start talking about the how you feel it affected the market from your point of view?
I can go. So we obviously see it in the contract team perhaps slightly differently, because I think job security is a really key issue, and some of the insights that we'll provide with the data later on should go into that in a bit more detail. But with contractors, you never quite get as much job security. That's kind of the nature of the beast. But at the same time, for contractors out there who are on the market, we found that COVID-19 has meant companies are looking for kind of temporary resource and kind of getting people in to plug gaps and things like that to kind of tide them over. Obviously, everyone long term wants to be building big permanent teams, but if you've adjusted your strategy and pivoted your plans to kind of tide through this, that's not always long term the safest option until you're certain of what performance is going to look like. So definitely we've seen an effect from our side where there's a few contacts that we have which would never have been interested in a conversation around contractors because they've got a really strong hiring policy for permanent people, and they're now open to it for the short term at least until I guess everything settles down.
And how about the actual individual contractors themselves? Like, how are they feeling about the market and the opportunities that are out there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I do think things are beginning to ramp up now. Actually, there was an initial period where you've got to feel. We'll go into it in more detail later on, but you do have to feel slightly sorry for the contractors who've gone through initial run up to IR35, and then we got through that, and then now coronavirus happened as well. So there was definitely an impact on the market in terms of just the number of live jobs. But definitely, from people that we're speaking to, there's a lot more contractors out there now who are interviewing, and there's a lot more stuff that's kind of starting to come through. Some people are getting slightly frustrated because it's not been as easy to pick up another contract because of the pressure put on managers. It's important to understand that they have maybe slightly fewer kind of bits of leeway that they can take when hiring. They have to make sure they get it right because budget's hard to come by. And kind of you may find yourself slightly squeezed at the end of a process because of that sort of stuff. Hopefully not. But yeah, certainly I think that there tends to be feels like there's some positivity around the market at the moment, which is quite encouraging.
Good stuff. And Tally, how about you? How do you feel that people in the marketing and customer analytics and digital analytics markets feeling about it at the moment?
I think it's kind of dependent on obviously the sector and things that you're in, but there's still been a lot of movement happening, which I think has kind of kept people positive, that they've seen that people have still been able to secure roles, albeit kind of at a different pace maybe what we're used to, but they've still been able to see that there's movement going on. So I think that probably reflects in the survey that people still felt fairly secure in the market, despite everything that's happening. I suppose since the survey that there's then been changes again with different businesses, so it'd be interesting now, I suppose, to see how people feel. But I think with the market that we're in, it's always going to be in demand. So there still has been that movement and things still being positive in different areas.
Yeah, I mean, what I thought was interesting from the data that came through was that it said before the COVID, the responses we were getting, about 80% of the respondents felt as secure or more secure than they did in their role this time last year. And to be honest, we would have expected that. And most people that move jobs are at least a bit passive within the analytics market. But then moving post-COVID, it only changed to 77%. So you only lost 3% after that. It might be because of when the data was taken and because the data was in March, but that's really not dropped off as much as we would have thought. It could also be a product of just the amount of investment going on in data and what a great market it's been for such a long time. I don't know what you guys think.
I can only really speak for the clients the businesses that I've been speaking to, but actually a lot of people from what I've been told experienced a bit of a spike in activity, certainly from a reporting and insights request immediately afterwards, because if you think about it, a lot of businesses were really quickly reevaluating their strategy, and suddenly they needed to know performance figures that maybe they had overlooked or never really gone into before. So actually, the analytics guys, especially some of the agencies who are kind of, I guess, covering for, kind of acting as analytics teams on behalf of end clients, they've been super, super busy for the first month or two because everyone wants all of the data so that they can then make their new strategies. And that's probably affected the individuals who are in these roles because you know, they've probably been, well, quite a few people have been feeling busier than ever, despite, you know, being sat in their living room or dining room or wherever they are. They're kind of working flat out.
And yeah, I think particularly over the last couple of months, actually, things have really picked up in terms of like the volume of jobs out there and the activity on the market generally. I think because the digital first businesses have been kind of the more successful ones throughout the challenges involved with COVID, and data is typically a big part of a digital transformation. So it seems like companies are keen to invest in that almost first. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Talitha.
Yeah, 100%. I think I was thinking the same thing as you said it. I think there's been a massive surge, I think, in the last couple of weeks, especially with new roles and things coming through. So I think, you know, it's starting to make a bit of a turn. And kind of touching on what Dan said, people have been able to use this time to collect a lot of information and data, and now they're in a position to start really digging into it. And I think that's being reflected in new things that are starting to come through. So hopefully it's getting more positive all the time.
And have you guys noticed like a trend of the type of businesses that have been hiring or have been kind of almost unaffected throughout the COVID situation?
Well, I think there's quite a few retailers that have probably done well. Not all of them, but I think there's quite a few that have benefited from the mass buying. I think, you know, a lot of client-side companies and utility brands and things like that, I think, have probably seen things be fairly normal. I don't know, Dan, you've got a similar perception on the contract side.
Yeah, I think as well. So, I mean, if it's been fairly well kind of reported in the news which sectors have done well out of this and which sectors have struggled. But I actually think as well there's an indication of the leadership teams of companies and how quickly they've made decisions. Obviously, we see the impact of those decisions in the shape and form of their recruitment strategies. But you know, the companies that have come through this quickly, as it were, have been the ones who've actually adapted to the conditions. Maybe they've realigned their targets, reprioritized their projects. And actually, so an indicator of this sort of thing is actually in June, we saw quite a few of the contractors that we placed. Those contracts were running until early next year, rather than, you know, we were getting quite a lot of short-term stuff in the build-up, and that's a sign that actually these are projects that have been signed off to kind of adapt to the coronavirus climate, the lockdown climate, because a lot of businesses' initial response was just to kind of hibernate and not move and kind of see what happens. But yeah, certainly the companies that have kept us busiest in terms of you know, recruiting are the ones that have adapted and made those decisions very quickly.
Cool. And obviously, another big product of the COVID situation has been like flexible working. And actually, it was on everyone's mind, and people were talking about it before the COVID situation. But we're all working from home now most of the time, except me today because my Wi-Fi's down. But I'm in on my own with a couple of people getting the office ready for the return to work. But yeah. But like flexible working was on everyone's mind before, and now it's obviously become really to the fore, and people expect much more working from home and flexible working following this. I mean, have you guys noticed a change in people's attitudes, or do you think that was kind of the new normal before COVID?
I mean, I think when I was looking certainly at the survey, at the guide, sorry, it's definitely gone up since last year. Like pre-COVID, I think the demand for flexible working had increased quite a lot. And I think it certainly every time we're speaking to people, you know, day to day, that's one of the first questions I get, and I know the team get around what's the flexible working, what's work-life balance like, and I think the kind of that piece is really key for people when they're making a move. You know, they want something that fits their lifestyle as well. So, you know, perhaps the opportunity that we've all been able to work from home will change things for certain businesses that maybe weren't as open to it before.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is it feels like in the data and tech market anyway, from the survey data that we've collected, is this was already happening. I think people who've obviously, been impacted the most by the lockdown measures are the people who had never had the ability to work from home before, and then that's been really weird for them. Speaking from experience,
true for us.
it's not something that really happened much, and actually a lot of people on the market in the data and analytics space, that they're used to having a degree of flexibility. I think maybe there's plenty of people out there who will experience that flexibility increasing, and it's going to be really interesting to see kind of as a knock-on dynamic. That may necessarily rule out people who feel micromanaged quite so much, how a business is adapting to managing people, managing their staff, getting performance out of them, because it involves a degree of trust as well. But certainly we've found that a lot of our kind of people that we've been speaking to have already had this to a degree. It's interesting to see actually what the outcome is beyond this. And actually, what does flexible, because before flexible working, if we were taking a job brief, for example, and we were going to kind of, ask questions about what a company's working policy would be, it might be a day, sometimes 2 days from home, and that would be it. Whereas, is that now the acceptable kind of norm, or would people want to see more? That's something that we're going to have keep an eye out for.
Yeah, and we've got a comment from Colin here saying like much of what we thought was normal isn't anymore, and we wouldn't want to kind of go back to that. And that's probably true from a flexible working point of view. I mean, it's really tough for families and people with lots of commitments outside their working lives to commit to 5 days in the office a week, particularly if them and their partner are both working full time, if they are in that kind of setup, or even if they're by themselves. So it's just a really, really challenging environment to spend 5 days a week in the office. So it is going to help people day to day.
It's also it's slightly unusual because like people are kind of generally regarded as well within their right to not want to come in if they don't feel comfortable from a kind of a health and safety perspective. Maybe they have vulnerable people that they live with and things like that. And actually, that kind of has put the power into the individual, the worker, rather than the manager or the company, which has been an interesting role reversal recently.
And just to reference the data on that, because it's not something we've really spoken about, but pre and post COVID data was very similar due to working from home, but it was all around like 84% of people either have flexible working now within the data analytics market. And I mean, if we look back to when we all started recruiting in this sector, I mean, it's completely different. I reckon that would have come out at like 15-20%, and that's over like 6 years, maybe 7 years. I'm being a bit generous to us there, but yeah, things are obviously changing rapidly, and I mean, that'll be close to 100% soon, I would think, as a product of this, because people have shown that they can do some of their jobs from home. Although I do miss the office personally. I don't know about you guys.
We can see that you're already back in there.
Yeah, couldn't resist.
Got the sleeping bag under the desk down there.
Sorry, go on.
Well, we just got quite an interesting question from Nadir, and it's maybe a tricky one to answer, so I don't know who to send it to. Maybe Talitha, you fancy it, I reckon. We've got is the scope of reducing for people applying for analytics jobs in the UK from outside of the UK because of COVID? That's quite an interesting question. I don't know what you think about that, Tally.
Sorry, I was just digesting the question.
Well, I actually had a chance to read it just before you.
So has it reduced people applying from outside of the UK? Kind of a mix, actually. It's funny, actually, because I have spoken to some people that were in the process of thinking about relocating, and that has changed quite dramatically. So I think I think maybe if you'd asked me this question 6-7 weeks ago, I'd have said, yeah, no one's applying to come over here at the moment. But I think it's starting to change a bit more. I think it's probably a bit of a temporary measure. I suspect some people might be a bit hesitant, but I think as things hopefully calm down and it will pick up again with people moving over. You've also got the fact that actually, if businesses are able to be a bit flexible and look at that remote working, maybe people will be able to accommodate people starting from overseas and moving over in a few months' time. But right now, there's probably been a slight reduction, but not huge from people applying outside of the UK, from what I can see anyway. I don't know, Ross, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I might think if anyone specifically is getting in touch and having challenges, one of the barriers might be that companies are less open to sponsorship at the moment, just because of budgets being squeezed a little bit and the looking down to cut on costs. I think actually, like, I agree with what you just said. Long term, maybe it'll be easier because I would say before this, like, very few clients would be happy to complete an interview process fully remotely without someone coming into the office. And actually, like now, everyone seems to be completely on board with it and happy with it. And very few clients are saying, no, we can't consider that. We need to have people in.
It's probably worth adding to that, in the contract market, it actually has had quite a big impact. Bearing in mind, I'm covering markets in Europe as well, and actually we've had candidates based in the UK interviewing for roles in Sweden, Norway, places like this, and vice versa, because certainly for the contractors on the market, they're kind of expected to be a bit more experienced and be able to hit the ground running anyway. They're not expected to come into the office, certainly in the short term. Or they can't be forced to be. And so actually, internationally, it's made applying for interviewing for jobs easier. And it's also benefited people who don't live in any of the kind of the major kind of hubs, like if you live in London, Manchester, then there's plenty of jobs. But if you live somewhere a bit more remote, actually picking up contract work is a bit easier at the moment, because you can have that flexibility. So we've actually seen that as a benefit. And even going thinking kind of ahead, I don't want to talk about it too much, if at all, but we do have kind of Brexit on the horizon as well, and actually for a contract market, we've got like a little mini. We've been forced into it, but actually it's proven that flexibility has worked. So now if you live in the UK, or if you live in Scandinavia or Germany or wherever, that has less of an impact, whereas it might have done previously if you were required to travel a bit more.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, I think, to see how things pan out in the coming months. But there's definitely some good points on there. Obviously, there's quite a lot to cover from the guide. One of the biggest pieces is the changes in technologies across all the different disciplines. I know we've got a couple of questions coming in on that, but I mean, Ross, from your side, were there any particular changes that you saw across data and data science this year from last year?
So I could probably break that into two, because it's quite different in the different markets. So just to summarize what our data and tech team does, because it's a bit of an ambiguous name, but we tend to provide like professionals that provide infrastructure for analytics to happen. So that might be like data engineers, BI developers, engineers, maybe software engineers, depending on the client. So those kind of professionals. So it's less about analytics tools and more about tech tools. So the big change we noticed, or particularly over the last 2 years, really, is just the amount of companies moving to cloud. Obviously, that's related to remote working to a degree, but just generally, the technology is much better, and it allows for much quicker, faster, more effective like data storage and data accessibility for people that need to use it. Obviously, the big players in that have been Amazon and Microsoft, along with Google Cloud. I think one thing that we've noticed a lot this year is big established companies, and also like maybe smaller, less tech focused companies still adopting a cloud infrastructure and a cloud like data environment with modern tooling, because the tech available is so much better, and that was reflected in the data. Actually, I don't think Azure was mentioned in the data and tech most popular tools last year, but this year it was like second or third. So that just shows like people moving from SQL Server environments into the cloud. But on top of that, you just see the same things you'd expect. So obviously lots of SQL, lots of Python as a main programming language.
Yeah.
And there are also, like, they're not necessarily mentioned in the guide, but we're seeing a lot more like cloud native tooling come onto the market as well. So things like Snowflake, I like Looker. I don't think that's exclusively cloud, but it definitely mostly paired with cloud technology, and those kind of products, which are really in demand from a client point of view, but also from a candidate point of view, actually, because a lot of people love using these tools and they want to carry on using them and learning. I imagine from a data science point of view, and this probably links more closely to the work that you're doing, Tally, in your teams, but I think it's just open source tech. So Python and R are the big ones. I think people have SQL as their kind of core bread and butter, but a lot of the more advanced work they'll be doing will be in Python and R. I don't know if you've seen the same.
Yeah, I think so. And we've had a question come through from Lingana, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, about the current demands and the job and the technology stack that companies are looking for. And like, I would echo a lot of what you've said, Ross, in terms of the core skill being SQL, which I think was the same last year. That was one of the top skills. Definitely across customer insight, Python has really been the tool that's kind of overtaken R in terms of demand. You know, a lot of companies are asking for that when we're speaking to them, and certainly a lot of candidates are quite keen to upskill on that. And things like SAS, which was massive when I started recruiting years and years ago, is much lower on the scale now. I think from a data science perspective, certainly when I talk to the team on that side, Python is huge, and that's really what a lot of the candidates are looking to upskill in. So I definitely say, in terms of technologies, if you're looking to build on them, trying to play around with stuff online, your spare time, open source is definitely the way to go, which is, you know, been the same for the last couple of years. On that side. And then on the digital analytics side, interestingly, over the last couple of years, we've definitely seen an increase in candidates on that side wanting to upskill on coding languages as well. So, I mean, on the guide this year, you'd see that SQL actually is a tool that's really come up from last year. And I think that's definitely reflective again in candidates when we're speaking to them, that that's what they're looking to build on as well.
Cool. And one thing I wanted to ask Dan actually is obviously, like, companies hire contractors a lot when they're kind of kicking off a project and they're making a technology move and things like that. Have you found similar things in the contract market, or has there been any major differences?
The contract market, it largely mirrors what you guys are talking about from a perm perspective, because the technology, you know, the companies are the same, and their tech stacks are the same as, you know, what the perm guys are using. It's not like there's a different stack for the contractors. Certainly, there's a demand for tech skills, especially people who are doing big implementation projects and things like that. One thing that we've seen from a digital perspective, which then rolls into kind of the other kind of technical disciplines that we cover, that you guys have gone through, is the need for digital transformations. I think it's become quite clear that companies need a digital experience, and if there's, you know, new and innovative ways to engage with your customers or your audience digitally, you know, if companies have been able to do that effectively since the beginning of coronavirus, then you know, performance figures would have been better. So I think it's become reshuffled and prioritized for a lot of leadership teams, and one of the first things, you know, that means is they need an outside influence, because yes, it results in a change in technology, but also perhaps there's a few cultural shifts that are happening. These are still conversations that are ongoing, but it really wouldn't surprise me to see more roles in areas such as product, as one, which a lot of companies are kind of looking into kind of how they manage their analytics. I've been asked questions from companies that I speak to about trends in terms of how analytics teams are organized. Actually, do they have that kind of centralized hub and spoke model, or do they embed it, and how do they do it? And I think it's going to be really interesting, because at the moment there's no clear right and wrong answer. It's kind of horses for courses. But I certainly think that the types of role in analytics may potentially evolve as companies look to become a bit more digital. So yeah, that's something that I've been kind of having an eye on from my side. Ross, we've had a couple of questions come through, which would be good for you actually, and actually there's two that kind of that line up. So if it's okay, I'm going to kind of group them together.
Okay.
So one of them is from Heather, who asks about the tips that we have for someone who'd like to move into the field of data science, and then kind of quite similarly is from Rainier, who wants you to highlight a skill which strongly correlates with the higher salaries in data science. So I suppose the question would be, if you're about to start off, what skills would you need to learn to make sure you're in demand and command a high salary?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think one thing that's important to point out is data science is quite a broad area. It's not one set of skills. There tends to be an overlapping set of skills within that, which is it's the good data manipulation, experience of programming, and statistics to a degree. But all of those things would also be true of a good customer insight analyst, and often those two can overlap, and we could probably talk for this whole hour on the differences, and not that I necessarily want to argue about that, but yeah, so it is quite a broad area, because it goes right from that kind of predictive analytics work right the way through to embedding like deep learning algorithms, which is really scientific and really technical, and typically people doing that more advanced work would come from a PhD background, and it is difficult to like transition into that. I would say if you're looking to move into that market, the key skills are to understand like really good data manipulation in SQL, and that's what clients definitely want. A good knowledge of like programming, probably Python or R, would be the best way to go, depending on which one you prefer, and also like some knowledge of machine learning and how it works in order to get into a data science role. It can be a difficult transition to make, and there are options between doing like master's degrees either in data science or in some kind of applied statistics, or there are lots of online courses in kind of some areas. My advice would be, particularly if you're an analyst looking to make that transition into a data science role, is try and start like picking up the online courses and stuff, and try and like pitch for projects internally to actually get that commercial experience, because that is what's going to really set you apart from other candidates. Because for actual data science roles, most of our clients would want some kind of commercial experience. If you're a graduate, go do a master's, maybe go do a PhD in some kind of a applied mathematical area, and that's probably the way to go. Obviously, both of you guys have got experience in this market as well, so I don't know if you guys would agree with that.
Yeah, I think what you said is spot on. I think a lot of it is about, maybe a few years ago, data science was just, people were starting to talk about it a lot more. It was kind of a different playing field. But I think now so many people are keen to get into the space that you really need to be able to demonstrate what you've actually done. And touching on what Ross has said, you need to be able to show that you've tried to upskill in your spare time. Whether you might not be in a position where perhaps you don't want to do a PhD, but maybe you can demonstrate that you've done certain courses, or you've built up a portfolio on GitHub, or you can show different experience that you've got, and you can demonstrate that on your CV. And it's really important that you do that. But also, be comfortable talking about it in an interview and highlighting what you've personally done, because the sense I get from a lot of companies is they do really want to invest in people, but they also want to see that you're passionate about it and that you want to develop as well. So I think you have to be confident talking about that and thinking about how you can upskill in your spare time.
Yeah, I
sorry,
totally agree. And just to add one extra point as well, when we're talking about commercial experience, it's actually the understanding of the value add that you provide. And that's not necessarily to data science specifically, but in any kind of role where you're involved in just directly problem solving, and obviously if you're providing insights, you would provide recommendations as well. Then it's really important to actually understand, this might sound really obvious, but to understand the business and how it works, and to understand how your team slots into the wider organization. I do think certain people, they have a eureka moment where they kind of stick their head above the parapet and realize that they've been focused on their own personal development, but for the next level they're actually focused then on solving problems and becoming a stakeholder in their own right. And I find that those who can take to those sorts of challenges naturally do tend to shoot up org charts.
And just one final thing that we might have missed on that, because there was a question on the one skill which correlates with higher salaries. I think to link in with what Dan just said, if you can demonstrate value add and clearly explain how your work led to commercial impact, that's one thing that really pops on the CV and also allows you to command a higher salary. The second thing specifically for data science is putting your models into production and deploying them. I think that there's been a lot of research data science teams over the last 2 or 3 years that maybe have come up with great ideas and built great models, but they haven't actually embedded them in the business. If you can show that you've got the software engineering skills to not just work in a control environment, but actually put it into production and embed a model into a business, that will immediately command a higher salary. Another area where you can do that is by further specialization. So obviously there's areas of deep learning, such as NLP and computer vision, which involve a high level of technical skill and often quite a lot of research work. And because they're so hard to find and so niche, that if you got proven experience in that and a depth of knowledge in that area, you can also do really well when it comes to salary. Just a reminder, you can download the guide via a link and get all the salary details for the different levels. I think it's in the link below. And again, if you do want to ask more questions, definitely get in touch. I think another thing that we're really keen to talk about is something we talk about in our jobs, with everyone all the time, clients and candidates, and it's reasons for moving on and motivations when moving jobs, because obviously it's important to everyone from a retention point of view, and you want to keep your best people, but at the same time, for someone looking to move, it's obviously really important that they get the change that they want. So I don't know who would want to tackle it, but what have you guys noticed has been most important when it's come to candidates moving roles and their motivations?
Well, I suppose it's going to be different for Dan and I on perm versus contract. But I think on the permanent side, I definitely say, I think this is reflected in this year, that the career progression is the big piece. That's what I hear time and time again, that people want to know that they're going somewhere, and they want to know that they're able to upskill. And I suppose that ties into what we were just talking about. People want to know that they're going to be able to use the latest technologies and build on their experience. But I think the knowledge of where they're going and what the role will entail in the next few months, people are always quite keen to know that. And if they're not clear, or they don't feel they're going to be able to get to where they want to go, that seems to be the big reason why people are often looking to move. I mean, Ross, do you see the same? Because obviously you're on the permanent side as well. So do you think that's
yeah, interestingly, and to kind of reference the data, marketing and the marketing insight team and our digital team, they both had the progression as their primary reason for leaving, which came out in the data. Actually, in the data and tech and I think that was also true in data science, or if not, it was really close. I think in data and tech, it was more salary led, but career progression was still number two. I would say, like, even now, like, increases in salaries are pretty consistent generally. So people are kind of thinking about that less and thinking about their lives kind of more when it comes to their role. One thing that's important about career progression, I think, is it's not just about promotions and getting to managerial levels or whatever. I think what's more important to candidates is they're always learning, or people in their roles is they're always learning, and learning new things and learning new tech. And actually, for a lot of people in data engineering, for example, they're not that interested in management or further responsibilities. They just want like more technical skills, to learn new stuff, to be doing the coolest thing on the market, and that side of progression, rather than just like moving up the ladder in a management point of view.
There are some overall interesting insights in the guide, actually, because not to go back to coronavirus too much, but previously the kind of the top thing that the market overall wanted was a more competitive salary, and then that did shift in the data to more career progression opportunities instead. Which goes back to the point that we were talking about in terms of job security. I also found it, and I'm keen to see what you guys think of this as well. But there were two stats that really stood out to me, which was that the average salary sought on the market was a 21% increase, but the average salary achieved was 15%. And which obviously is really important to know if you're about to go into the market now, because clearly there's a disparity there. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I think a lot of people talk about their salary expectations, and I think the challenge is the market kind of self-perpetuates a little bit, and everyone's talking about like massive pay increases, and then suddenly everyone kind of expects it. Maybe the reality of the market isn't quite as apparent as the noise that's made about the salary increases that are on there. I still think like 15% as an average salary uplift is really strong, and like that's a lot, and it will change people's quality of life when moving jobs. So I think that's still a really good indicator. It'll be interesting to see what it's like this time next year, but personally, looking at salaries from people we've helped find roles recently, there's still been significant uplifts, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's not changed that much, although I expect it to change a little bit, but not that much. I don't know if you guys would agree.
Yeah, but I think there's, I think it's the same with everything, isn't it? There's a lot of conversation about, they can get X, Y, Z, but I don't think the data obviously shows that doesn't always happen. I think when I was looking at the data from specifically, obviously from my area, so marketing and insight, and then the digital analytics team, it looked like on the whole, the salaries have increased, but perhaps not as dramatically as maybe a few years ago, where they were really jumping quite a lot each year. And I suppose maybe that's down to, as the market is growing, you've got more people coming in, there's more talent coming through, and so things are kind of calming down a little bit in that way. And businesses aren't going, that they're offering huge increases like they might have done before. I suppose contracts are slightly different one, isn't it, Dan?
Slightly different, yeah, but I do think, generally speaking, if as an individual your priority has shifted towards progression versus salary as your primary, then I would personally be considering, actually, if I'm going for a 20% increase, that's above average. But if I really want that job, do I know that that's a appropriate salary to ask for? So I think this is where the data comes really handy for those who are potentially looking at the market, is they can kind of weigh up how much do I want this role versus how much do I think I should ask for, because that can be a really difficult question to answer without information.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, you go, Tally.
No, I was just going to say, I was just looking at the other side of things are that on the salary side, things have gone up, but also bonuses have increased. I think from last year, people on average are getting 15%. I think even in data science, I think I was looking at it, and it's 22% on the highest bonus. So
Yeah.
there's a little bits of the package that have gone up as well.
And just to kind of wrap up on this, reason, because we've got a couple more topics we want to cover for the reasons for people moving on. Like from a retention point of view, my key advice to clients or businesses, that are looking to stay on top of their staff and keep their best people would be to really invest in their training and their progression, because that will enable them to, one, add more value to your business, but two, like keep them interested and keep them like valued in the company. And also it can be tricky at times, particularly as for example, data science teams might get paid on average much more than most other teams in a business, but still, like if you can regularly increase their salaries, you might save money over time in recruiting and getting training people and getting them up to speed and investing in all your time into that, because that the progression point is something that comes up in all markets, all the time, I would say. Is there anything else we want to talk about for reasons for leaving, or do we think this is a good opportunity to move to Dan to talk a little bit more about the contract market, because that's obviously changed a lot in the past year?
Yeah, well, we can go on to that. I will caveat that I won't go into too much detail. I will provide some sort of general kind of overviews, but the reason for that is we are actually working on a follow-up live session with a couple of experts. Hopefully there's one or two people that we've lined up that will be really good speakers. So keep an eye out for that one, because that will be specific to the contract market, where we'll really dig into topics such as IR35. I think it's impossible to talk about the contract market without talking about IR35 at the moment, because it does have a relatively sizable impact, and where it impacts contractors specifically is that we've seen in the data, is things like people kind of, I guess, there's stats such as 20% of contractors on the market are now, will be considering a permanent role in the build up to IR35, which would have been much lower if that piece of legislation wasn't pushed through. But then 57% of those who did convert from contract to permanent took a pay cut last year. So obviously, it depends on a number of factors. It needs to be kind of weighed up in terms of, are companies willing and able to pay contractors the difference to bring their rate up, or to kind of bring parity to what they were earning previously? Have they even factored in, the individual's tax when they're kind of making these decisions as well? I found in a few conversations that they would make an increase to rate, but they wouldn't quite compensate for the tax change as well. All in all, and like I said, we'll go into it in more detail in a future one. I do feel like there'll be a kind of a funny few months, and then things will begin to normalize and stabilize as companies get a handle for their processes and understand what they can and can't do and what they should and shouldn't do. So yeah, we have seen some more, some positive stats come through from the market as well. So for example, 24% of our contractors did receive a pay rise when moving on to their next contract. The average pay rise was 20% on day rate as well. So that's slightly higher than the permanent market. So that's really good. And we have seen the kind of the extension length remain at about 6 months. As well, which has been really encouraging. But yeah, because of the decision to push back the changes to IR35 until 2021, it has meant that the contract market can recover slightly faster. And yeah, we've been able to kind of probably do more placements in the current conditions than we would have done previously.
And one thing that I noticed in the guide, because obviously there's lots of changes to the contract market at the moment, which does sometimes lead contractors to start considering permanent opportunities. But it was only 20% of contractors that would consider even permanent opportunities. So I mean, there's not much of the market, and personally, I find that a lot of contractors that would consider it would still prefer contract opportunities. Tally, have you noticed more contractors looking to go towards permanent roles or not?
Yeah, I think probably a few months ago, a lot more people were looking at maybe moving into a permanent thing. It's tough, I guess, isn't it? Because actually, for some contractors, it might have just been that it's the right time now for them, that they want to move into a permanent role for job security. And then obviously IR35 and COVID happened, and so things change again. But yeah, I think there was a bit of an increase. I think, again, as things are starting definitely to get more positive and new roles coming through and just generally more traction in the market, I think it's evening out a bit with people, contractors actually feeling quite comfortable to stay in a contract position. Obviously, some businesses are actually able to take people on a contract basis a lot quicker and a lot easier. They can bring them on for 3-4 months as opposed to having to commit to a permanent role. So a bit of a mix, probably, I'd say.
I think a lot of what you see on the market, it looks at advising companies to be prepared for changes to IR35. I would also encourage career contractors to be prepared themselves. Many of them will be. They'll have had their, got their savings sorted and things like that. But I do think that if you're prepared, it's not it's not ideal, but you potentially are financially in a better situation to take a shorter term contract through an umbrella company. Your impact, per day will be reduced on that particular contract, but it would also mean that you're available at a shorter notice to move into an outside of IR35 contract. And also your gross income based on the day rate should still be higher. So overall, you'll still earn more, albeit you won't have the benefits of a permanent role. So it just depends on how you want to do it. But I do hope, and I'm keen to see what the guys on the next live session that I'm on say as well. But I would hope that it's going to be a short-term thing whilst companies find out how to compliantly hire contractors again.
Cool. And just quickly, like we've just got 5 minutes left, so if you do have questions, just please ping them through now. But another thing we wanted to touch on briefly was diversity, and we have gathered data, especially on gender, as part of the guide. Appreciate that's not all of diversity, and there's lots of other factors. But and we do actually have a diversity report coming out later in the year, and we've got last year's one online available if you're interested as well. But it's obviously an important talking point in the market at the moment. Salitha, do you want to discuss like what clients have been talking about or businesses have been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall it's really positive. I think across all the different sectors we saw an increase in females. And I know I am talking specifically about gender diversity here, but in females in the market, I think overall, we've gone from 25% up to 30% in the last year, and certainly within marketing and insight, that was the highest sector for females, with 42% of the workforce being made up of females. So I think that's really positive. I think maybe some of it ties into businesses being slightly more flexible and being open to the fact that actually, there's a lot of factors that come into, hiring people with different circumstances. So businesses are being maybe more flexible to split roles, sharing roles, flexible working hours, and so on. I also think that there's a huge trend with a lot of investment into young years, like in schools and things like that, with investing in girls that code and different things like that have probably helped to push it up from where it was last year and the year before. I know, as you said, there's actually a lot of stuff that we've managed to collect this year. So I think the diversity report that we'll release in a couple of months will be able to give a really good overview of what's been going on in the market as well.
Yeah, and one thing for kind of my markets, we're still, particularly in data and tech, we're still the lowest in terms of diversity. So we have gone up, which is great, but it's gone from 18% to 22%. So it'd obviously be great to see more women in that market, but it is slowly improving as a product of more people going into STEM subjects. We've got a few different questions to tackle before we wrap up. So I've been there's a quick question. I'm not sure who it's from, but it's spoken about if someone's a data scientist, should they work with AWS or Azure? I don't actually have any objective data on that, and there are lots of different elements to both Azure and AWS as products. Like there's hundreds of data products on the AWS stack, for example. My impression is like more data engineering teams are working with AWS technology, which would lend it to a data scientists to kind of start working with some AWS machine learning tools or things like that within that stack. However, the Azure, I've kind of dodged answering this question, but the Azure stack is kind of improving all the time. So if you can, like I'm sure that if you do start working with the cloud infrastructure of Azure, then that will also help your applications as well. So we've got another question from Krishna. So what roles will be highly in demand once this crisis gets under control, and which ones will cease to exist? I don't know who wants to tackle that one.
I suppose we both can. I think, well, from my perspective, I know this is probably a fairly broad answer, but I think part of the benefit, I suppose, of being in this market is everyone wants to understand what's going on with their customers and understand their data. So I think all the roles are probably going to still be in quite high demand, which I know sounds like the thing that I would say. I think probably we're going to see an increase in some insight hires, because I imagine, certainly from conversations that I've had, businesses have now been able to collect a lot of data and really been able to see what customers have been doing and how they've reacted during this time. Things like we said, working from home, not being able to go out as much as spending money on different things. I know I'm spending a lot of money on homeware stuff at the moment. It's going to be bits like that I suppose companies are going to be quite interested to see. So off the back of that, I would say there's going to be some quite pivotal increase in insight positions as clients or companies really want to understand what their customers are doing and the so what, and also I suppose how they might react with hopefully nothing like this ever happens again, but in a similar circumstance, and how they might adapt. But then I would imagine like the kind of data engineering BI type roles are still going to be really prevalent, because you need to have the data in the right space. I don't know, Ross, whether you would agree with that, or Dan.
I would just say that I mean, in all of our markets, we cover pretty much I would say the whole spectrum of data analytics across contracts and perm, and there's been no market where there's not been any vacancies during the COVID crisis, which is great news for everyone. And we're just seeing the volume of jobs increase across the board. So I would say I don't think anything is going to become redundant. But I think there's investment in all areas on big data projects. I think it's looking good for most specialisms.
Yeah, it's important to understand that when you hear about trends in the market, there's still plenty, that kind of relies on companies to act quickly enough to kind of implement new technologies, new processes, sometimes new cultures, and that's not something that can be kind of done very quickly. So I do find that certainly in my experience in the data and analytics market, there's a few skill sets that have become less in demand now, but like for example, the shift from SAS being a primary modeling tool to R, which we shows in the salary guide, but that's been something that's been talked about for 4 or 5 years. So while the shift, that there are definite shifts, and there will continue to be across industry as a whole, they're quite slow, and it may mean that if you haven't upskilled yourself in a certain area, there's a few roles out there that you'll struggle to apply for, but there'll still be plenty of companies who haven't updated things yet, and if you're in the right role, you should be able to learn those skills over that period of time.
Yeah. And also SaaS still came in the top 5 for our most used technologies,
Yeah.
and no one talks about it, but clearly lots of businesses are still using it and working with it, and actually we see people transfer from SaaS to R or Python like all the time. So it doesn't mean any of the skills are redundant. They're still definitely used, and it's still easy to make that shift.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that we'll have to bring it to a close. But, thank you so much to everyone that's joined us today and listened in, and for all of your questions and getting involved. I hope we've been able to get through as many as possible. But obviously, feel free to reach out to us, directly via LinkedIn, or via our website as well. So you can download the link for the salary guide. You can download the salary guide from the link in the post. We've got our next live on Thursday, where we're going to be launching our EU salary guide, and we've got the US one launching next Tuesday. So obviously, please join us for that as well. As we mentioned, the diversity report is going to be coming out later this year, and we're also going to have some more information and live around contract and IR35 coming up soon. So thanks so much for joining us, and please do get in touch with any questions.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.